see that it's recording?
Yeah, it's recording, Avlyn.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much. All right, well, welcome everybody. This should be our last session of the umpires training. Tonight is Control Commission, cox weighing, lightweight rower weighing, and boat weighing. We will have a session, hopefully with Herman, who will give us a summary before anybody sitting for the exam, which we do have scheduled for the 23rd. We must just check that that date's still going to work for everybody. And as I said earlier, Fatini will load all the training sessions onto the website after tonight's training. She'll load the other ones as well. All right, so Control Commission. Control Commission is really the hub of where everything happens. And this is the principles, again, always safety and fairness. And your fairness definition is for all rowers to compete fairly, and they must show respect for their opponents and for the regatta officials, being at the start on time, following the instructions of the officials at all times, both on the water and off. Now, being at the start on time can also be affected by what is happening at the Control Commission. We need to ensure that Control Commission is flowing smoothly. We don't have congestion at the jetties, because if the athletes have allowed enough time, but we're battling to get them through there, that can affect whether they get to the start on time or not. And the officials, in turn, need to ensure that we apply the rules of racing fairly, and there's an atmosphere of respect to all competitors. Now, Control Commission, what do we need there? What are our major concerns? Well, our major concern is always, again, is safety, and we're the ones who are going to be checking to make sure that the boats are safe, that it's fair. We're the communication centre. We're where all the action really takes place, where the racing really begins. We need to make sure that the measures are in place at Control Commission that's set up for the actual race. We communicate with the president of jury, the umpires, the finish tower, regatta master, boat weighing, cox weighing, the marshals, medical, and anti-doping. So we really are the communication centre of the whole regatta. Not only that, we're also the interface between us as the umpires and officials and with the athletes. So that's where the athletes really, first face that they deal with really is at Control Commission. So there you will see Control Commission centrally placed to the course. What do we need? We need a calm atmosphere. The athletes will meet with their coaches before they get their boat to go out. Coach will be giving them instructions. They get into their little bubbles. And they want to come through Control Commission and not have chaos reigning. Need a calm atmosphere. And we need to give them clear instructions based on the rules. So avoid unnecessary disturbance to the crews. Remember that if things have to change, it is the task of the crew or the coach, a team manager, not really of the umpire, to make those changes. But at the same time, be positive, not negative. If there's a problem, say to them, this is what you need to do in order to race. Don't say, well, sorry, but this is a problem, you can't race, because it will stress them out. And what has happened to my slides? I can't see my slides, guys.
Do you need to start sharing your screen again, I think?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, share. Okay, it's just preparing it again. I don't know what happened there. Sorry, guys. See. All right. Resume. Right, so we have a calm atmosphere We're positive. Who are the officials at Control Commission? We have the judge at Control Commission, who's in charge of the whole. So somebody's still got your mic on there. If you can just turn your mics off, please. Thank you. So there's the judge at Control Commission.
We've lost the slides again, Avlyn.
I've lost the slides. Oh no.
We have.
No, we can see them.
I can see them.
I can see them.
I just see Avlyn. Okay, let me leave and come back.
Sorry guys. All right, so we got the judge at Control Commission. Then you've got your Control Commission administrator, who's really administrating the WhatsApps, the paperwork. Then your Control Commission checkers, checking the boats. And then your jetty and shore marshals. Now, you don't always have jetty and shore marshals. For your bigger regattas, you will. And it's really handy to have them because it does help with the flow. And then you have cox and athlete weighing officials. Again, not at every regatta, but at your national and championship regattas, you will definitely have them. And then the same thing for boat weighing. So there's actually a lot of things happening and a lot of people surrounding Control Commission. What do we need? What equipment do we need? Well, the first thing we need are our hymn sheets, the updated latest racing program. And for the administrator, obviously very important for them to have a full crew list because they need to be able to see all the crews. And some of the crews, the people who are checking the boats as well, if you're going to be doing athletes checks, you would need to have a full crew list as well, because you would need to know who the people are who are supposed to be in the boat. You need your two-way radios to communicate with the other stations. Your clock set to regatta time, and we use a cell phone time. You should have your latest rules of racing and the handbook. So if there's any questions or queries or disputes about rules, you have them handy. And then a copy of any local rules pertaining to the regatta. So that generally you get from your regatta notice. So in your regatta notice, it will say, we are going to allow late entries if there's a lane available, or whatever particular rules are around that particular regatta. So it's good to have a copy of those local rules. And very important to have a copy of the water traffic patterns, because at Control Commission is where your boats are going out, and we want the crews to understand what the water traffic rules are, and if they do ask, we need to know what they are. And then wear your pale blue or white shirt, navy or beige pants or skirt. I don't know about skirts, quite honestly, but anyway. And no supporter shirt. So you can't be at Control Commission in your school supporter shirt or club supporter shirt. You need to have your ID card and, well, for your own protection, hat and sunscreen. Right. Then other equipment you need, a clipboard. You're going to be checking boats for the checkers. Bring a clipboard. An elastic band is always handy to stop the pages from blowing all over the place. A pen, a pencil if it's raining, because a pen's not going to write. Plastic folder, keeping it dry. And then a tape measure or measuring device if you do need to measure anything. And then tools to assist crews. Not to do it for them, but to have those tools handy, because instead of them running off to the shed or to the coaches trying to find a screwdriver or a spanner, number 10 or 13 spanner, shoelaces are always handy. It is easier if we actually have them at Control Commission so that we can hand them to the crews to sort out anything that they need to sort out so they can get onto the water and race. If we're doing weighing of boats, we need the scales and the test weights. Generally, that will be in another area. Yes, I see, Andrew, and most importantly, you do need a sense of humour there. A smile always goes a long way. And then you need your scale for your cox weighing and for lightweight rowers. And then the wristbands for the coxes and the lightweight rowers in 2 different colours to record the weights for them and the lightweight rowers. Now, the duties at Control Commission. So checking safety and eligibility of boats. That's the most important, safety and fairness. Then we're going to be taking crew changes if they're allowed, and late entries and scratchings, hopefully not too many scratchings. And then updating the WhatsApp, which is, as we know, the way that we communicate the changes and things in the races. We control the entry, the launching and the exit of the boats. We're liaising with the other officials to the whereabouts of crews. So that's very important, because if a crew has left Control Commission and hasn't arrived at the start, that is a safety issue, because where are they? Have they tipped? Are they stuck in the reeds? Have the fishermen got them at Ridderplaat? So very important to know where the crews are. We also need to check uniforms and athletes' IDs, especially at championship regattas. Important to know that the right athlete is in the boat. We do cox weighing, boat weighing, and then we also have the notification of health conditions. So coach may come along and say, look, we have an athlete who has asthma. We can't advertise that all over the radio, but we do know that there's a condition in that particular boat, and which we need to communicate. And then we are also the liaison between the rowers and anti-doping. Now we'll go into more detail on those, each area. So the first one we need to look at is the safety and eligibility of the boats. So your bow ball needs to be a minimum of 4 centimeters. But not only that, you need to make sure that that bow ball hasn't got a slit in it, that it's not perished, it's actually in good condition, because that bow ball is what's going to hopefully take some of the impact if we have a clash. And underneath that bow ball, that boat is very, very sharp, and they're traveling at a speed, and they can do some serious damage. So that is a huge safety issue, and that bow ball needs to be in good condition. Not only that, but it needs to be nice, clear white, especially for the judge in the tower at the finish, and any cameras that are there, to make sure that they can actually see that bow ball crossing the finish. So if it's grey and dull and discoloured and not very good, it's going to be quite hard to see that bow ball crossing the finish at the end. And then most importantly too is your correct bow number, because if the umpire is starting the race and they've got 2 boats with the same number, then you're trying to sort out the bow numbers, and the finish tower and radioing that there's 2 boats with the same number gets very confusing when they're coming across the line. So very important that we check to make sure that they have the correct bow number on the boat at Control Commission. It saves so much trouble and time further along down the line if we make sure that is right. But then not only that, it must be vertical, so they mustn't have it lying down, and it needs to be 150 millimeters of lettering, black on white. I don't know about, they say yellow, but black on white. At SA Champs we had, I think it was Selborne, had this really fancy font, and we're probably going to have to add in a requirement for the font, because from the finish tower you could barely read the numbers on the boat, and I'm sure the crews would rather have us seeing their number than getting the number wrong. We also need to check that there's no transmitting or receiving equipment in the boat, because the crews are not allowed to communicate either from the bank, from the coach to the crews, or from the crews to the coach. So there must be no communication with the crews, and no data may be sent or received by the boat. Your allowable devices are your time, stroke coach, boat velocity, acceleration, and heart rate. Those are allowed. Other equipment for communication is not allowed. At an international regatta, the actual organisers may put devices on there to allow them to actually show on live feeds and on camera where the boats are and the positioning, but that will be supplied by the actual organisers and not individual crews. The next area we really need to check is your shoes. So the heel strap, it needs to be a maximum of 7 centimeters, and it must be individually fixed. And this is a huge safety issue, because the thing is that if the boat tips over, the athlete, if they were to lift their heel, the lace must be short enough so that it keeps the shoe down, so that their heel can come out and their foot can be released from that shoe. Because if the boat is tipped over and the athlete's feet are stuck in those shoes, they're now underneath the water and they are not going to be able to get out if they cannot lift their heel at least and have their foot released. So that's the first area, is the heel strap. Then the second part of that is your quick release, which is either Velcro or a similar material. The two must be joined across the two shoes, and the athlete must be able to grab a handle and release it in one quick movement that opens those shoes that are holding their feet firmly in place, and release them so that their feet can come out of those shoes easily. So there we see a good example of what a quick release should look like on the shoes. So both of them are attached, and you can see that one movement will open those Velcro straps and release the athlete's foot. On the right, you see that that is no good, because there are now 6 straps, and if the athlete is upside down in the boat trying to find those Velcro straps to get their feet out of the boat, it is a huge safety issue. So I think we just need to remember at Control Commission, the things that we are checking there is not just because we want to be grumpy and pedantic, and it really is to do with safety. These things we're talking about are huge safety issues. Now, the one thing that I haven't really seen in our boats as yet, I don't know if anybody else has, is that you could have quick release shoes, similar to what you have on a bicycle, where it clicks in, so the athlete would just turn their foot and it would actually release. So the shoes would stay on their feet, but it would clip out of the boat. So those are very important on the shoes. Then the next important area is your bung covers, so that if the boat tips over, it doesn't fill with water and sink with the athletes inside. So we need to make sure that those covers are watertight and securely fastened. So if they're cracked and they've got duct tape over it and tape over it, and well, if it's not watertight, then it's not safe. And safety is our primary concern. So you need to make sure that those bunghole covers are good. Now, some boats have numerous bunghole covers. You won't just have one on a boat. You could have numerous. On the Scull, you might only have 2, maybe 1, but on bigger boats, you will have numerous, and you do need to check them, because they will have compartments all the way down the boat that are need to be watertight. Some of the very much older boats, sometimes you'll find that the covers aren't available anymore, and so long as there are enough of them to keep that boat afloat and they are sealed, then that is okay. But you need to make sure that that boat can float if it tips over. The next area is the coxswain seat. So I don't know that I've ever measured this, but it's supposed to be 70 centimeters long, and it needs to be 50 centimeters wide. And so that's the enclosed part, and there mustn't be anything obstructing so that the cox can actually get out of that area quickly. They should also not have their ballast, if they're carrying ballast, sitting on their laps. It needs to be away from their bodies and not on or attached to them, so that if the boat did capsize, the cox doesn't go down with the ballast, which is not a good thing. Right, then I think I'm just going to stop there a minute and just ask up to that point, are there any questions on the safety issue of that boat checking, or any comments that anybody wants to make?
Avlyn,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So at the Champs, I was on shore marshal duty, and I've not done that before, where there was the weighing of the coxes. So I was instructed, that with the coxes, some of them might have ballast, and we kind of had to. It was quite difficult to go back and forth between the admin to see who had now been weighed and who needs to be checked on the shore. You're going to move up and down. But then what I also wasn't sure about, I was told to sort of just hang about and then just sort of pounce on them after they'd got in and check if they had their ballast. But I didn't realize, are you supposed to disqualify them if they get in the boat and they don't have it?
Okay, so if they're getting into the boat, you asking them where their ballast is, at that point in time, you're probably going to find they're going to rush off to go and fetch it because they've probably forgotten it. So
yeah,
when you're checking it on the way out, you're actually almost in a way assisting them to remember, because sometimes these little coxes, they're trying to get the boat and they're trying to get the crews, and they could quite easily have actually forgotten their ballast behind. So at that point, if they have time and they can go run and collect their ballast, you really want them to race and let them, get their ballast on. So we're going to be discussing just now exactly how we mark those coxes and how we will identify what their ballasts are. So yeah, so but yes, it is quite difficult, and it is important for Control Commission to communicate the information of what ballast the coxes are carrying, but we will discuss it, but it should be written on their wristband. So if I don't answer all your questions when we come to that, then just give me a shout.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now moving on to the administration of the crew changes and the withdrawals. So your Control Commission checkers are going to be checking the crews as they're going out and doing all those safety checks. But not only that, they need to make sure that the crews that are on the list to go out are actually the crews who are going out. So at a championship regatta, national regattas, we're supposed to have books. Every row has to be registered with Rowing South Africa. And every club is supposed to have a file with a sheet and a registration of each competitor and a photograph of their competitor. And it has to be available at Control Commission. And we're supposed to do checks to make sure that they are the correct rowers who are going out in the boat. We have looked at maybe doing it electronically, and I think probably we will do that in the future, because it's quite a mission to find the file. St Mary's comes through, now we must find St Mary's file, and then we must find the athlete and check those athletes So it can be quite time consuming, and so we do generally do random checks at Control Commission, but it is important to at least look at the athletes and make sure that they do look like they're the right athletes for that crew, and confirm the age category. You know, you can't have an older crew in the boat. And then important to note the time that the crews check out. So the checkers will check the boat, and then they will relay that information back to Control Commission administrator, who will make a note of when that crew actually checked out. So that if the umpires or the marshal are looking for a crew on the water, we can say, well, they only left 5 minutes ago, or they left half an hour ago. We need to find them. Or, well, they left 2 minutes ago, they're not going to make their race. So when it comes to checking the crews out, I think this is probably going to be something that we're going to talk about, because if a crew, you can see that the crew's not going to make the race because they've only got 3 minutes to get there and they need to row a kilometre to get to the start. It's quite tempting to say to the crew, you know what, you're not going to make the start, so sorry, you can't go out. The problem is that if there's a delay and there's a restart of a race ahead, and it turns out that the crew could actually have made it, even though they wouldn't have made the official start time, then we at Control Commission are going to be in trouble, because the coach is going to come along and say, well, the umpire stopped my crew from going out and the race ended up only starting at this time and they could have quite easily made it. So it really is up to the crew to decide that they want to still try and make the race. Obviously, if the race has already started, there's no point, or if the race is on the start, they're actually lining up. But be careful about telling crews that they can't go, because you could get yourself into trouble later if there are delays. But very important to make a note of the time. And then controlling the entry and the launching and the exit of the boats is very important for competition and for training beforehand. If there are crews that are running short of time to get to the start, but then there's other crews that are holding up the jetty who are going out way too early, you need to also have a look and say, right, please, can we get these crews on first and get the jetties flowing properly. It does help if there are shore marshals there. So if you see long queues, just check that there aren't crews who are short of time and get them to go ahead of the crews who still have ample time to get to the start. I don't know if anybody's had any experiences with this where you've held crews back and then they could have probably made the start, but it's not a good thing to have happen. Any comments? Okay, you see the comments give me a chance to have a sip. Right, we go on to uniform check. Now, uniform check at Control Commission is also fairly difficult, because although the crews have to race wearing the same uniform, if the members of the same club must compete wearing this registered racing uniform for their club, if they're composite crews, so especially when it's masters, you might have composite crews. Now for Gauteng seniors and national regattas, you might have 2 crews from St Mary's and 1 crew from Holy Rosary and another one from somewhere else. You can have composite crews, but they must be wearing their registered uniforms for the clubs that they're representing. So if they're representing a club, they need to be wearing those uniforms. And if headwear is worn by any members of the crew, then they must all be the same. Now at Control Commission, they might all have caps on. So long as when they get to the start and before the race starts, any crews that aren't wearing matching hats remove their hats, then that's okay. They can row down to the start all wearing different caps. That doesn't matter. The umpire at the start may say to them, uniform violation, which means he's giving them the opportunity to rectify whatever violation they have. So they would have to make sure that they're all wearing the same caps, as an example, and the ones who don't have the same would have to remove them before the race. But at Control Commission, you can't really check that sort of thing. If they're wearing different skins, different undergarments, you may want to ask them and say, look, you know, before the race, you would need to remove the ones that aren't matching. So this is now adhering strictly 100% to the rules. Now we know that at our regattas, especially at the beginning of the year, and some of the juniors and the development crews, they don't necessarily all have exactly identical uniforms. We also don't want the athletes to get terribly sunburned. So, you know, we are fairly lenient on some of these uniform regulations, but according to the rules, if we go to strictly abide by them for championship regattas and things, these are the correct regulations. And when you're writing your exam, you're going to have to know what those regulations are. All right. Okay. So if you see the little picture there, you can see that international regattas, they even worry about whether they're all wearing the same color socks on the same feet. But we're not going to get into that degree at our regattas. Right, then let's look at what the administrator, really the important information that we now sending out via WhatsApp. Really important that we send this information out in an orderly fashion. Your marshals and your umpires are really going to battle to understand if you send out information for race 1 and then race 5 and then you go back to race 1 and then to race 6, try and send out the information in race order when you know that that race information is complete. And start with the race number. When the umpire comes down to the marshal and says, hey, you know, what's happening with my race number 7? Do you have all the athletes? And they're missing somebody. It's a lot easier to find the information if the first bit of information on that WhatsApp is the race number. So start with the race number and then the detail. Don't send images, only text. So we need to notify, say, race number 3, the stroke name is changed to Smith, scratching in lane 7. Also need to notify any coxswain who are carrying ballast and how much that ballast is. And also that if there are any boats that are having to have ballast, so that the umpires at the start can ask the coxes, show me your ballast. If it's a boat ballast, show me your boat ballast. And then also any information on medical conditions. So if a coach has notified Control Commission that there's an athlete in seat 2 who has a medical condition, you need to put that information out to that umpire, and also contact medical if they are asking for that boat to be followed by medical in case there's a problem. So that information does need to go out for that particular race to the umpire. And then if there's any yellow or red cards, so if there are yellow cards that have been issued for anything prior to that race that pertains to that race, then the umpire does need to know. Because if there's a clash at the start and the umpire issues a yellow card, but that crew already has a yellow card coming into that race, then it would be a red card, which means they would be excluded. So it is important information that does need to go out. Not really often that you would have a yellow card. If the cox hasn't weighed in time, or the athlete, there may be a yellow card. But that information is important to send out to the umpires. Right. Crew changes. Let's talk about crew changes. If it's a national or championship regatta and no changes are allowed according to the regatta notice, then before the first heat, if it's a single scull, you can substitute that sculler, but only with a medical certificate. You cannot substitute a single sculler without a medical certificate if there are no changes allowed substitute at that late entries or at that regatta. For crew boats, up to 1/2 the number of rowers. So if it's a double, only one person. If it's a quad, 2 people, etc. If it's a regatta we are allowing changes as per the regatta notice, then we can substitute a single sculler and we can substitute the crew. But if there are heats, then after the first heat, you cannot substitute, a sculler cannot be substituted, because if one person has rowed the heat and somebody else cannot then row in the final or semi-final. And as far as the crew are concerned, championship regattas, they can have substitution after first heat, but only if a medical certificate has been provided. For normal regattas, after the first heat, again, no substitutions for a single sculler. And for crews, if it's approved by medical, so if medical says, look, we know that this athlete has a problem, then they will allow a substitution. But if not, then there will not be allowed any substitutions. Okay, sorry, I saw some comments coming up there. Were there some questions there?
Yeah, Avlyn, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Doug?
Yeah, it was just about the weight of the boat. We don't weigh the boats before the race. You mentioned that if the cox is underweight or if the boat has to carry ballast. The boat carrying ballast is the crew's responsibility. It's not the umpire. The umpires only get involved in that after the race.
Quite correct, yes. Absolutely. So the crews need to make sure that they have weighed their boat, and then it's up to them to ensure that they're carrying that boat ballast when they go on the water. Anybody else? Okay, let's go on to actual cox weighing. So at a national and championship regatta, all coxes under 18, 19, 23 senior and master crews must be weighed. Now, I know we haven't done a lot of this over the last few regattas, and we haven't had regattas for a long time. So I think at SA schools, it was quite new to a lot of people. So really, what must happen is that the coxes must weigh in between 1 and 2 hours prior to their first race of every day. So if it's a regatta that's been held on a Saturday and a Sunday, if they are coxing on the Saturday and on the Sunday, they must weigh in on both days. And on each of those days, they need to weigh in between 1 and 2 hours prior to their first race. So if you look at that slide, if their first race is at 11 o'clock, they must weigh in between 9 and 10. Then if they have another race at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they don't have to weigh again. What you do need to remember that is if you are at cox weighing and the first race of the day is at 8 o'clock, These crews are entitled to come 1 to 2 hours prior to that first race, which means that cox weighing should start at 6 o'clock in the morning. 1 to 2 hours before the first race. School crews may be coxed by a scholar of the same age or 2 categories younger. And then what we have done is, in the interest of safety, we allow an older, more experienced cox to cox under 14 crews. And I think in the 8s, in the octs, we have actually made it mandatory that they be coxed by a senior. But according to the rules, it says not at a national championship or national regattas. So now what happens if a cox does not weigh in before their race? So if they don't weigh in before the race, then they will be issued with a yellow card. But then on return, when they come back to the jetty, you need to weigh them. And if the cox is underweight, then the crew will be excluded. So let's just have a look at that again. The crew doesn't weigh in beforehand, and the umpire finds that they're on the water and they haven't weighed, the cox hasn't weighed in, they will be issued a yellow card. Then the Control Commission needs to be notified, and when that boat returns to the jetty, you need to weigh the cox, and if the cox is underweight, then that whole crew will be excluded from that race. For coxswains under 19s and all seniors, the minimum weight for men is 55 kilogram, and for women and para rowers is 50 kilogram. Senior and master crews, there's no regulation. The cox can be female or it can be male, and that's 55 kilograms. And the ballast that they need to carry can only be well, they say lead shot, weight, or sand. So you can't have water in bottles or bricks. They can't come along there with a couple of loose bricks and say that that's their ballast. It needs to be in a container. It needs to be sealed. The weight needs to be, we need to know what that weight is. You can't have water because they could pour the water out and then fill it again when they come back. So those are your restrictions. The maximum ballast for juniors, so they cannot carry more than 15 kilograms. So if the cox is way underweight, they cannot carry more than 15 kilograms. And if that is the case, then they're going to have to find another cox, or unfortunately those coxes tend to then drink water to get up to weight, which is probably not terribly healthy, but they do that, and then they cannot carry more than 15 kilograms. So if they cannot make the weight with the 15 kilograms, they would have to find another cox. For some reason, I'm not quite sure, the seniors, the maximum ballast is 10 kilograms. So if we have a look at a summary here, you'll see that for men, minimum weight under 19, 55, and women and para 50. Minimum weight for masters 55, 55, and for juniors they can't carry more than 15, and for seniors they cannot carry more than 10. Now these sort of information, if you're going to be working at Control Commission, you're doing cox weighing, take a sheet with you. Have these numbers, these weights and things handy so you can always refer to them. And also if you've got your rules of racing, you've got that page, keep it handy with you. And then the crews, there's no argument about what the rules are. When we weigh the cox, they must only weigh in their racing uniform. So they can't have a jacket on and tackies and all sorts of things. They have to weigh in their racing, in their tri-suits. Or whatever they're going to wear to race in. You weigh them and you record the weight. If they are fine, then you will give them, at the beginning of the day, we'll decide what the color is going to be. So let's say the yellow wristband is going to be for coxes that are fine, they don't have to carry ballast, and the blue wristbands are for coxes who are underweight. So at least the umpire can see, that cox has a yellow band, so they're fine. That cox has a blue band, they need to show me their ballast. And then we write the ballast weight on that band, because once they get down to the umpire, at least the umpire can see, you're supposed to be carrying 15 kilograms or 10 kilograms or 1 kilogram. And it's up to the coxes and the crews to bring the ballast, not for you to be going around looking for ballast for them. So if we just look at this cox weighing, the weight's okay, end of procedure. Weight's not okay, they must add weight, come back. So if they start weighing at 9 o'clock in the morning, their race is at 11. So long as they're up to weight by 10 o'clock, which is the window period, they can come back and forth until they actually are okay. Some crews don't like to carry ballast. They will rather get the cox to try and drink as much water as possible so that they don't have to carry the ballast. But they have to be at that weight within that window period. So we need to ensure that the cox is ballast. We've checked it. The outgoing jetty marshals, as we mentioned earlier on, it does help to check that they have their ballast with them, because it's just reminder and helping them that they're not going to now have a problem when they come back. And the umpire at the start and at the finish can check that they're carrying their ballast. At the incoming jetty, the jetty marshals, and then control commission. So if the crew cannot present the required ballast, control commission must notify the president of the jury, and the penalty for underweight coxswain is exclusion of that boat. Right, I see some various questions coming up here. Same gender officials to do weighing of coxes. Is that Andrew?
Hi, sorry. Some of I have seen it in the past where ladies need ladies to weigh them, particularly as Doug says, hiding of weights. How do you check that? It's quite a close-up, intimate process.
Yes, we have had unfortunate incidents in the past. You need to be careful of certain things. Where the rowers have their socks and they sort of push them into their tri-suits, the leg of their tri-suits. We've had occasions where they have had stones in their socks and pushed them up their tri-suits, or in their undergarments, which is, so generally, I think that can be an issue, Andrew, that same gender. But, if you have a problem, you need to check, then maybe you could call on another official to come and help you.
I think, Avlyn, the way things have been going with, let's just quote, water polo, it will be enforced.
Okay. Interesting. So that we'd probably have to have somebody to call on if there was an issue, and you'd have to have two lady and a man checking. Is that what you're saying?
I would imagine so. There's certainly a lot of pressure amongst the coaching community starting to come about, where they're starting to say, same gender coaches, same everything. We just got to be careful. That's all.
Okay. Good point there. Right, then I see another question there from Carol about the carrying of ballast where it comes to boats. If I can refer back to that when we get to the boats. We're just going to go on to your lightweight rowers now. If there's no more anything about the coxes? Sure, Doug, I may have forgotten something.
Avlyn, you've got 2 hands up.
Okay, sorry. Who's the first hand?
Got Andre, Becca, and Denise.
Okay, Andre.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry I was late, but doesn't it happen, especially with the kids, the school rowers, that they actually forget about weighing, and despite the fact that they might all be within regulation, they then get excluded from the race because they forgot to weigh in, but they're actually not transgressing any of the weight regulations. Doesn't that happen? And is there not leniency towards that?
Yes, okay, so if we have jetty and shore marshals, that's why we need the 2 different color bands to put on their wrists. So if you're a shore marshal, or even the control checkers, if the cox doesn't have a band, then you know that they haven't weighed in. And then remind them, you need to weigh, because we'd like to prevent problems rather than giving out yellow and red cards. But then if they do end up on the water without weighing, then the control commission needs to be notified. So if the umpire finds there's a cox down there without a band on, and therefore they haven't weighed, radio control commission or message control commission, so that when the boat comes back, that cox goes straight away to be weighed. If they end up being fine, in other words, they weren't underweight, then there's no penalty. But if the cox has raced and did not check and did not weigh in and is now underweight, then they will be excluded, the crew will be excluded. So we need to try and prevent it from happening if we can when they go out. And it is an issue because we haven't done it for a while. So we need to try and make sure that it happens, prevention rather than cure.
Okay, thank you.
Denise?
Hi, Avlyn. So we only weigh the ballast after the race. We don't reweigh coxmen after their race.
Okay, yes, but then if they haven't weighed, then you need to weigh the cox.
Correct, yeah, but just we don't reweigh coxmen again. We only weigh their ballast.
Only weigh the ballast. Yeah, if you want to check that their ballast, so in other words, they haven't managed to open. So if you've got a bottle and it's full of sand, they need to tape it closed. It needs to be sealed. It can't be something that they can have when you've checked them, then get rid of, and then add back to by the time they come back. So it does need to be a sealed container. Generally, they'll find stones and sand and various things like that, but they do need to be sealed. And if they're carrying like 3 bottles, the bottles need to be taped together as a unit, so that's one lot of ballast. Otherwise, it's very difficult if they've got multiple items that make up one lot of ballast. Yes, and then it's only for the seniors, yes, and older. And there's no, you're right, Doug, there's no excuse for not weighing in time. These are not under 14 crews. Yes, they might have a younger crews as coxes, but the crews should know by this stage that they need to weigh in time. And so there's no real excuse, but we must try and remind them. Okay, is there another hand?
So what happens if, Avlyn, what happens if the weight says 4 kilos and when they come in, the weight is now 7 kilos?
That's fine if it's over. That's their tough luck that they went with more. If it's less, it's a problem. But if they went with more, well, too bad, so sad. Hopefully the crew rode hard.
Okay, thank you.
So, you know, in the past, we used to do a lot of cox weighing, and I really don't like the idea that the coxes can drink 2 liters of water to try and put on 2 kilograms. They stand on the scale, you weigh them, they make the weight, you say, okay, you're fine. They step off the scale and they're vomiting in the bushes. But unfortunately, that is the rule. So long as they've made the weight, there's nothing much you can do about it. Don't like it, but that's the way it is. Anybody else?
Avlyn, yes, it's Philip here.
Yes, Philip.
To my knowledge, the ballast that the individual cocks must carry is written on the armband. Did I miss you saying that?
Yes, so it must be written on the armband, and
it's written on his armband.
Yes.
And on returning to the jetty, we hope in future to have an umpire on the return jetty to check on that. And then he has to show the ballast that he has in the boat with him, and it must comply with the weight of the written on his armband.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Is a big fairness issue.
Yes.
Okay, so now let's go on to lightweights. Now, we wouldn't normally see this because school regattas, we don't have lightweights, but now we're coming up to seniors, Gauteng and SA National Championships. We will have lightweight rowers. And the same thing applies here. They need to weigh in 1 to 2 hours before their first race. Now, female crews, excluding the cocks, must not exceed 57 kilograms, so the average weight, okay? And no single rower can weigh more than 59. So you can't have one rower who weighs 80 kilograms and then a whole lot of anorexic rowers joining her. They do need to have the average weight not exceeding 57 and no single rower weighing more than 59, which means they need to come and weigh in as a crew. Otherwise, you will have no way of knowing, you know, oh, well, that one's coming later on. So they need to come and weigh in as a crew. You will see mainly at our regattas, scullers, lightweights. We don't have crews really who are rowing in lightweight categories. So a maximum weight of a single sculler for a female must not exceed 59 kilograms. For the men, it's 70 for average, and no single rower more than 72.5. And if the crew does not meet that weight requirement for that race, they then are excluded. They cannot row in a race that is designated as lightweight if they are not meeting those weight requirements. They will have to then move to another race. They cannot row in that particular race. So again, let's just look at the summary there. For the men and the ladies, the maximum, the minimum, and the single sculler. So again, keep those references with you. Lots of numbers and things to remember. And if you do them enough times, they'll start becoming sort of automatic. Right, let's go on to this boat weighing. Now, all the boats need to meet a minimum weight. So there's a random, either a random draw done by somebody appointed by the POJ, and we need to keep this a secret. We can't like let people know who are the boats who are going to be weighed ahead of time. The boats, so the crews, it's up to the crews to weigh, to make sure that their boats are up to that minimum weight before they go out. So the scales need to be made available before the regatta starts for crews to weigh their boats. And the boats will be weighed with the fittings essential to the use of that boat. So there will be the riggers, the stretchers, the shoes, the slides, the seats. But they do not get weighed with the bow numbers, with the blades. We need to make sure that any excess water is out the boat. So if they've had the boat upside down above heads, and the water is reasonable and any excess water has been taken out, any clothing that's in the boat. Now the minimum weight includes sound equipment and any other electronic equipment, including the cables, that is actually wired permanently into the boat. So the speakers and that sort of thing, and as well as seat pads that are firmly fixed. Sorry, somebody got the mic. So anything's firmly fixed, but not Cox boxes. For Cox boxes have to come out, bottles, stroke coaches, any of that kind of equipment must come out of the boat. Now, generally at the championship regattas, I think the crews probably know by now that the big races we weigh first, second, and third place. So they do really know that they're going to be weighed. But any other random weighing, what you need to do is the Official Air Control Commission needs to notify the crew that they've been selected for boat weighing, but only tell them as they're taking the boat out of the water. Don't tell them when they're still sitting in the boat, because they can splash water into the boat. They can, affect the boat or find ballast to put in the boat. So you need to tell them once they're actually taken the boat out the water. And then you need to escort them to the boat scales. The weight of the boat must be recorded. We've got boat weighing forms and signed by a member of the crew and the official who weighs the boat. If the boat is underweight and the crew did not carry any dead weight, then the Judge and Control Commission must sign the form and advise the President of the jury, who will then relegate that crew to last position in that race. Now here's an example of the boat weighing form. So you've got date and time, club or school, race number, lane number, the event, stroke name, boat name, minimum weight that it's supposed to be. And then you have your first boat weighing. So the first time you weigh it, what was the actual weight? Okay. And then the crew representative must sign it and the official signs it. If the boat is underweight, then you will get them to remove the boat from the scales. You will take the test weights and put them onto the scales, check to see that the scales are reading correctly according to those test weights, and then you will get them to put the boat back onto the scales and take another reading. And then you will record that and get them to sign for the weights. So if we just have a look, so we weigh the selected boat, the weight's okay, end of procedure. If the weight isn't correct, you write the result on the form and sign it, check the scales, then you weigh the selected boat again. If it's okay, end of procedure. If it's not, then you must write it down again and sign the form, and then it will be boat underweight. And you would then need to notify Judge and Control Commission, who would notify the POJ. So at the beginning of each day's racing, the scales must be tested. So we need to make sure that we are fair, that we put the test weights on the scales need to be on a flat surface. They need to be weighing correctly. And again, the scales need to be available at least 2 hours before the first race of the day for test weighing. So if you want boat weighing, sorry, but you do need to be there 2 hours before so that the crews can come in and weigh their boats. But when they are doing test weighing, it's not for you to tell them what the weight is. So the scales will have a screen and it will show the weight of the boat. Okay, it's up to them to have a look at that weight and decide for themselves whether they're happy with the boat weight or whether they aren't. Because if you say, okay, it's fine, your boat is fine, and then they go and race later in the day and they come back and the boat is underweight, they may have to say, Well, that umpire over there, when I tested my boat, said this weight was fine, and now the boat isn't. So it's actually not my fault because the umpire said it was fine. It's up to the crews themselves to make sure that they're happy with the weight, and that they make sure that they have boat ballast if they feel that they need it. It's not up to the official to check and to tell them what the weight is when they're doing their test weighing. During racing, they can still come and check their boat, but if we've got boats that are coming in for testing that have been selected, those boats take priority. So people who are doing test weighing will have to wait, while boats that are being selected are weighed. And so it is the sole responsibility of the crews to make sure that their boat makes the minimum weight. So if we have a look at these boat classes here, for the single scull, you see it's 14 kilograms, double is 27, and those weights you do need to know for your exam. There's some boats we don't have in this country. We don't have coxed pairs, but we do have the other boat classes. Now, when there's lots of other things, we need to make sure of when you're doing boat weighing. So remember that sometimes the crews will store things in the holes. You know, they'll open the bunghole cover and they'll shove a shirt inside there. So, you know, when they lift the boat, make sure there aren't spanners or things that have been stored inside the compartments in the boat. Make sure that, as I said, all the things that are not allowed to be there have been removed, including the bow number needs to be removed. The boats, if it's been borrowed from another school, the crew that's rowing that boat, it is still their responsibility to make sure that that boat is the correct weight. And it's up to them to make sure that they have the boat ballast. Now, if they are carrying ballast, when you get the boat from the water and you notify them that they have been selected for weighing, you need to ask them if they have any boat ballast, and then they must show you that ballast at that time, just in case they decide to pick it up somewhere along the way. So you do need to escort them up there and make sure that they are not doing anything along the way. Where it becomes tricky is when there's boat swaps. So if a boat has been selected for a boat weighing, but that boat is now going to be used and we're doing a jetty swap for another crew, that crew will, you can't force that crew to now come with the boat, and then the next crew now can't race with that boat and miss their race. You have to allow that boat to go out again. You need to make a note of it as to which race that boat has gone out with, and when that boat comes back, you now then need to go and find it at a later stage and get that boat to be weighed. Now, what happens if that boat is underweight? Are both crews excluded or only the first crew? Well, the first crew, the one that was selected, is the crew that rowed with the underweight boat, the one that was selected, and they're the ones who are going to have to be excluded from that race for boat underweight, BUW. Right, any comments and things that I've forgotten? Doug, guys? Philip, I see you got your hand up.
Avlyn, yes. Leave the slide on. On this particular slide, you see that the boat length is listed there. The Cox 4 is 12.89 to 13.65 meters. This is something Selwyn and I were debating the other day. The boats must comply with not only weight, but also with length. They can't be shorter and they should not be longer. But we don't actually check that. With 2023 around the corner, it's something we probably will also have to check. So if a boat is selected for weighing after an event, perhaps it should also be measured. The length of it should be measured in accordance with that table, because that the actual lengths are prescribed in our rules of racing, I believe it is. Can somebody confirm that too?
Well,
thanks, Avlyn. That's all I wanted to say about that.
I've never been at a regatta where we've measured the boats, and even at World Masters in Hungary, there was not any talk really about the length. But yes, I think perhaps what we should do is actually notify and have a look at all the boats that we're going to be renting out or loaning out, renting out for use at World Masters, to make sure that they comply, so that we're not renting out boats that are going out there and don't comply with those regulations, because we do have quite a lot of old boats that may not be up to those regulations. But I've never ever measured the length of a boat personally.
Okay, thank you. But that's just a point that came up. It actually came up in 2023. All the races will start from the 1,000-meter mark, and the boats will actually be anchored by a person that will hold the stern of the boat.
Correct.
Okay, and so that the aligner must be able to align the boats, and the boat holder, I'll call him a boat holder, I'm sure he's got a different name, must be able to move it sufficiently far enough so that there's fairness in racing. Simple as that.
If it's very far out, it's going to be difficult for them to get that boat aligned, correct? They do have a bit of leeway, but if it's very far out, it will definitely be a problem.
Yep, that's correct.
Anybody else? Did anybody on this group do boat weighing at SA Champs? It can be quite a hectic position to have, because you're getting the information from the finish tower. The boats are coming off. There's lots of things happening, and you definitely need at least 2 or 3 people, 1 weighing and 2 people fetching boats, in order for it to work well. How was your experience at boat weighing?
Well, it was shocking, actually. We weren't aware of the procedure. We hadn't had this training, so we probably made errors. There was a couple of boats that were underweight. They got excluded. Well, not excluded, but relegated to last place, and ended up, at least 2 of them ended up going down in lane 9 in the final, because of the fact that the correct procedures weren't followed. We didn't have the forms. We weren't aware of the ballasters for coxes either, having to be certain things. We knew it couldn't be liquid, that was all. But it was tough, and it gets stressful when all the coxes are there and the crews are trying to weigh boats. At the end of a race, weighing the boats isn't the problem. It's beforehand and trying to get the coxes with the time. That was always the challenge. It was tough, and it's not that pleasant when you find something that's under.
No, it's not at all. And I mean, it's not as if you've just got a couple of people standing there. When you've got lots of 8s and octs queuing up, it can be quite challenging. And then also, if you've been, let's say there's a whole lot of scull races, and you now have been told you need to weigh these sculls, you're obviously going to have the scales set to weigh sculls. They're going to be a little bit closer. Just remember, whenever you move the weights, the boat scales, you need to do test weights again, because changing the angle or the level of the floor can affect how they're weighing. And then if you get a crew coming along with an 8 and saying, we want to do test weighing, well, that's fine. But if you are busy with boats that are weighing from a race, that takes priority, and the oct or the 8 would have to wait. And if you have to move those scales in order to weigh those bigger boats, again, you move them, you have to do the test weights. You move them back, you've got to do the test weights. So if you can find some kind of a happy medium where you can accommodate all the boats, that's a good thing, because moving the scales around can be problematic. But you need to be really, really, really very mindful of what is in those boats, and don't be scared to say to them, please, if I want to, open the bunghole, check that there aren't, and also don't be, the one time you think that the schools with the fancy new boats, their boats are going to be like really close to the weight, and maybe they're the ones that you should check. And your Germistons or your Soweto probably have such old boats that they're going to be so heavy that really, and sometimes those older boats don't necessarily comply. So just make sure that you don't sort of prejudge because some of the older boats are the ones that are the problems, and the newer ones are far more accurate.
Yeah, one of the boats left off their backstays to be lighter.
Yeah.
One that was selected for weighing. So
yeah, you've got to be very wide awake when you're working there. Anybody else?
There's a couple of hands.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't know who first. Denise.
So I did the coxswain boat weighing on the Sunday at Champs, and I mean, it wasn't too bad for us, but the one important thing which you mentioned is not to tell them the weights before when they do their test weights. We had to have it printed on the wall, and it was a requirement from the national coaches as well that we didn't discuss the boat weights, that the crews were able to see their boat weights for themselves so that you don't get yourself into any unnecessary trouble.
Correct. Thank you. Yes. Philip?
Our boat weighing system is not accurate. We've got test weights, 2 by 10 kilograms and 1 by 20 kilograms. And if you put all 3 weights on the scales themselves, 2020, it reads 39.9 or something like that. It's only 100 grams out, but in our efforts to be fair to everybody, we are going to have the scales recalibrated, and the recalibration brings with it a certificate. So if any of the coaches query our system, we can show them it works, and we will have the latest calibration certificate there on the wall. It'll be enclosed in one of these plastic sleeves, but we have to do that. That's one of the tasks, to-do tasks that we have going forward before Gauteng Champs and SA Champs in May.
That's good news. Glad to hear that. But we do allow a certain margin, don't we?
No. There is a weight. It's what is it? It starts 14 kilograms, not less than 14 kilograms, not less than 27 kilograms, not less than 54 kilograms. And each one of them, it's always not less than 14 kilograms, and that's it. We must stick to that rule. It's 14 kilograms and more, not less.
Thanks, Philip. Anybody else? I can't see all the people with all the hands here. Anybody else got a hand up?
Philip was the last.
Okay. All right. Let's go on now to the health conditions. I think we did discuss that. That some representative needs to notify Control Commission if one of the rows has a medical condition. and you then notify the umpire of that race. Medical condition C2 race 10, and if safety has to follow that rower, then you need to notify them. But each competitor is responsible for their own health. When it comes to the paras, if we have them rowing at Gauteng and essays, we do generally get safety to follow that race down, and so that's really not that much more on their health conditions. Then the drug testing. Now,
Clive has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Good evening. You were just talking about paras. I was just concerned because previous SA champs we've had paras, and if you are being appointed to a para weighing station, be careful. We do have different weights for para boats. So try and brief yourself if you've been into weighing stations and you see para on our draw. Just pull that up because we don't actually put that on our board for para boats.
Yeah, I don't think. Is there a sheet of the para boat weights?
It's in the rules of racing. I do recall it seeing it there somewhere. I remember I ran into it once before. Sorry, I just couldn't get on fast enough.
No, thanks, Clive. I think maybe I should try and add that to my slides. At least then everybody has a record of it. Good point. All right, so let's come to the last thing you will be pleased to know. Slide number 40, drug testing. Okay, so South African Institute of Drug-Free Sport. Rowers may be subject to doping tests at any regatta in South Africa. So we don't necessarily know beforehand that they are going to be coming. So we have to make allowances for them. We have an area where they would be set up. Obviously needs a bathroom, and they will tell us at Control Commission that an athlete has been identified for random testing. So when the race is completed, the official at Control Commission will go down to the jetty and notify that that rower has been selected. So it could be the stroke in that lane in that race, or a sculler, or whoever. They will let you know who they've identified. Control Commission official must accompany the rower who's been selected, and then you need to assist them to either contact their coach or somebody that they've identified that they want to go with them to the control station. So obviously if it's an under 14, they're pretty much going to want their mother or father or to go and accompany them, or maybe they want the coach. But you assist in finding that person taking them to the doping station. You introduce them to the official at the doping station, and then after that, that's where your responsibility ends. You don't have to do anything further than that. Identify them, help them find somebody to go with them. If they don't want anybody, that's fine. Take them to the doping station and hand them over. Any rower who has a medical condition, there's a TUE form, a therapeutic use exemption form, that they have to fill in ahead of time and register, and they would need to produce that exemption form when they were at the testing station, so that they would know that they are, the reason for them having had those substances that are prohibited. So it's very important for the athletes to register that ahead of time. Right, that's really the end.
There's his hand up again.
Okay, Philip, yes?
Avlyn, this is a question, it's not a statement, it's a question. We've got an oct, or we got an 8, yes. And they selected for dope testing. Does everybody in the boat is everybody in the boat tested, or is only a selected person tested?
No, it's usually a selected person. So they'd either select a person or a person in seat 4 or seat 8 or they'd select a particular person for, or they'd say the winner in the scull race of race.
A scull's okay. I'm talking about when there's a double or a quad or an 8.
They'll select an individual. Generally an individual, unless somebody else has any other comment on that. I've only found individual.
I don't know. So,
yeah, I've only ever done individuals. Normally they'll come to you and tell you who they're testing, but it's always an individual, never a whole crew.
But
they selected
yeah, the whole crew is penalized if an individual is found to be have consumed some performance enhancing drug. But if they're sick, if they've got a cold or flu or something like that, and they take certain medication, there is a list, I'm sure, of medications or prescription drugs which people are entitled to take prior to a race. I'm sure of that.
No. So on the website they give you a list of things that you cannot have, okay, and it's up to you to make sure that if you've got a cold beforehand, you don't go and take something that contains those drugs. So your responsibility, the athlete's responsibility. So it is quite scary because there's some real kiddies, babies medicine that has stuff in that actually is banned. So athletes need to know that if you are sick ahead of time, you can go onto the website and you can actually search particular medication and see if it's actually approved, or speak to the doctor or the chemist or whoever they are. But it's up to them to make sure that they are not taking, you know, what do they say? Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. You can't say, well, I didn't know and I took some flu medication. They need to be careful what they take before racing.
Right.
Sorry, could you say, yeah, what WADA -AMA.org shows the list of prohibited drugs, and it is up to the athlete. Can I see another hand up there? Oh, Philip, was that the?
No, Avlyn, may I use this forum? Denise, have you found the those, what do you call them? Those armbands for the coxes that we left in UJ shed. Sorry to ask that question here, but yeah, we need them.
I've asked Cesware, I'll follow up with him on the weekend. I'll go and check if they're there. He did say there was a box there, so I'll just check with him on the weekend.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Avlyn. I'll get off the line now.
All right, Justin?
Yes, hi, everybody. I was also just going to say on the testing, just having had a lot of experience with clients that have gone through this. Remember, the results don't happen immediately. So whilst, you know, there's obviously post drama that can take place if an athlete's found positive, it doesn't or shouldn't have a direct impact on us umpiring a particular race or a particular crew, because there's nothing that happens immediately on the day. It's simply a testing procedure. And just having represented clients who have been tested and what have you, I would just urge us as officials to make sure that you hand it across, as you mentioned earlier, hand it across to the people on duty and leave the premises. It's not our duty to worry about how they tested or if the procedure is correct. Our only duty is simply to present the athlete and then leave it to SA AIDS and to WADA to do whatever procedures they need to do. The less you have to do with it, the less the complications.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much for that information. Yes. Anybody else? Okay, I'm sure that I'm going to remember things that I should have mentioned, but thanks everybody for attending, and if there's no more questions, we'll end off here. For Tini, thank you. You're going to make these recordings available on the website. Is that correct, for Tini? Are you still there? Carol, I see there you have a question. Huh?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I missed it, Avlyn. What did you say about the returning boats for checking for their ballast? How do you know which boats are supposed to have ballast on the incoming jetty when you shore marshal?
Okay. All right. So for boats, if they've been selected for weighing, when you get them at the jetty, they're taking their boat out. You tell them that they've been selecting for weighing, and then you will ask them, are you carrying boat ballast? Because remember, it's up to them to make sure that their boat meets the minimum weight, and they need to make sure that they're carrying the ballast. So when you identify them and you tell them they selected, you ask them, are you carrying boat ballast? And if they say yes, they need to show you that ballast that's coming out of that boat. And that at that stage, you don't know what the weight is. When the boat, make sure that the boat and the ballast gets to the boat weighing as it is. And then when the person who's doing the weighing, tell them this boat has come with this ballast, and then they will obviously need to weigh the two together. You need to identify it at the jetty.
Okay, so it's just the same as the boat weighing. It's just random. You don't have to check everyone who was supposed to.
No, it's really that if they've been identified, selected for boat weighing, you need to make sure when they're coming off the water that if they're carrying boat ballast, that they do have it with them when they come off the water. That correct. Was in the boat when they raced.
Yes. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks very much, Avlyn.
Paul?
Good evening to all, and thank you for the opportunity, Avlyn. I would just like to take you back to that first point you spoke about with Control Commission and for a jetty marshal. And just as using as an example, the Saturday at SHMs where we had issues with time delays. I seem to understand that we are not really allowed to tell coaches not to get the boats on the water. But I mean, on the day we had that bottleneck where we had a lot of boats on the water, which became a safety issue, and marshals were struggling to get boats at the starting line. So how do we communicate that without necessarily telling the coaches what we are not supposed to say? I don't know what is that though. Because I got a sense that I'm not allowed to tell them that we are running behind and they can slow down in bringing down the boat.
Yeah, it's quite a delicate thing because, you know, as I said, if they're actually lining up for the start of the race, that's probably a time where you can say, look, sorry, but that race is actually lining up. There's no ways you're going to make the race. But if they haven't started lining up and there's races ahead, then it's quite dangerous to tell them not to go, even though you know that they're probably not going to make it. So, yeah, when it comes to jetty congestion, if there's a lot of boats and we are getting delays because the boats can't get on the water, then you do need to notify the POJ. Well, a control commission, a judge at control commission must try and get everybody to manage the situation and to get boats ahead that need to get on the water. And then if you do feel that the boats are being disadvantaged and that they're not getting on the water in time and they might miss their races due to no fault of their own, but due to jetty congestion, then you need to notify POJ and say, look, we've had all the octs coming through here and the jetties are so congested and the boats are not getting down there in time. Then if the umpires at the start and they realize, well, hang on a minute, these boats aren't here, but it's not their fault that they're not here, then the POJ needs to make the decision as to whether they're going to wait for those boats or not. And it's really on at that time and that circumstances that the POJ and everybody will need to make those decisions. Okay, I see some more hands up here.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, I know you have. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Philip? Philip, is your hand still up or didn't you put it down?
I didn't put it down. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Hands up.
Well done, Avlyn. Lovely presentation. Let me say that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And hopefully we will have many more people writing the exams. And please, I know that the regatta for Gauteng Champs is only at the end of May, and SA Nationals is in East London. Anybody who gets the opportunity to umpire in East London, take the opportunity wherever you can. And as I've said before, don't be scared to work at different positions, even if you're not feeling like you always want to be on the water. Do go and do all the different positions so you understand how everything works. But thanks again, everybody.
Avlyn?
Yes.
Nationals has changed.
I seem to have heard. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to talk?
Yes, Nationals is back at the original date in East London at the end of April.
Avlyn, I've got a question.
Yes. Okay,
Sorry,
Bradley.
Philip, you can go. You can. Okay. Hi, everybody. Avlyn, I think being new into this, I just wanted to. I mean, everyone keeps on talking about the exams. When are these exams happening, and what has happened when you do the exams? Do you do them prior, or it's something that you build up to? I just want to understand.
So if you are very new, then I suggest that you get a bit more experience before you do the exam. You would need to also go through the rules of racing and the racing handbook. There's a lot of information that you do need to do. But what I suggest for you, so let's say the next regatta allocated control commission.
Yes.
Then read up on control commission before that regatta. If you get allocated as a marshal, read up as a marshal. And then when you actually then performing that duty on the day, a lot of things will become make a lot more sense. So I suggest you get a bit more experience before you write the exam. We will have exams again later in the year, but the next lot of exams were supposed to be towards the end of April, on the 23rd, I think we said, at VLC. I will send out a communication just to find out how many people are interested in writing the exam. We'll have we'll have a training session before that. We'll make the training available, and then if we need more training courses for people who are wanting to write the exam and have questions and want to do a bit of a workshop, we can do that as well. Okay, anybody else?